My name is Miles Nolte. I'm a second-year master's student in the English department. My focus is on composition studies, which means that I study writing, and not in the creative writing sense, but in a broader sense. How we use like a symbolic representation of language, how we do that and why we do it and what good it is. So we're going to be talking about low-stakes writing, which may or may not be a term that you're familiar with, but you will be shortly. The idea behind all of this is we're all educators in some capacity at this point. I think everybody in here is a GTA, right? Okay, so we're all having to think about the ways that we want to achieve or help our students to achieve learning goals. And this is, I want us to think about low stakes writing as a tool that we can use to achieve these goals. And when I'm talking about goals, I'm really talking about, and I apologize, high order thinking. So getting beyond just the memorization of material to asking students to construct their own representation and understanding of the material and then be able to apply that somehow. And that is kind of the ultimate goal in all of this. This is just one way that I'm suggesting we can go about doing that. It's not by any means the only tool, but I think it's an underrepresented and undervalued one. And I don't think it's as well understood as it could be. So, hence the reason why I'm here talking to all of you. This presentation, or at least the first half of it, I'm going to be going through an overview of low stakes writing, why I think it's valuable, some ways that it can be applied, some things to think about when you're approaching low stakes writing, and why you might want to use it in your classroom. The overview is basically the same thing that they do in this book. This is Mikichi's Teaching Tips, Strategies, Research, and Theory for College and University Teachers. Any of you who've taken EDLD 530 have encountered this text. If you haven't, and you're looking for a very practical text with like very readable suggestions that will help you in the classroom, not necessarily in a theoretical sense, but in theoretical and practical sense, this is a great text. So my walkthrough in the first half of this presentation is more or less hitting on the same broad ideas that they cover in the low stakes writing section of this. The second half of this presentation, I'm going to be bringing in another voice, an author, a composition scholar named Peter Elbow, and his an article that he wrote called The Shifting Relationship Between Speech and Writing. And we're going to kind of use that. We're going to look at some really, it's very esoteric, very English major in the way that it's written. But what my intention in bringing that in is to sort of question that, to see what value, practical value we can get out of that, and then work on applying it. The other thing you should be prepared for with this presentation, and I know it's kind of inconvenient because some of you are still eating, but I do expect everybody to actually write. This is a low stakes writing kind of workshop and seminar, so we're going to be doing low stakes writing. So I expect that that's how we're going to do that. Some stipulations on that. As you approach the writing tasks, I'm going to ask you to please not put your name on it. And I'll talk about all the reasons for this as we go through. But I'm going to be modeling some low stakes writing exercises. And you're going to be engaging in them at the same time that we talk about them. So I'm going to ask you not to put your name on there. When you're doing these low stakes writing tasks, we're going to start with one. So I'm going to give you some specific instructions. And these should be similar to instructions that you would give to a group of students if you were going to be asking them to do a low stakes writing task. So the idea here is to try not to get hung up on the construction of the text. And what I mean by that is the ideas are the important part. The thinking that you're representing on paper, just putting your ideas as they come to you straight down onto the paper without that middle phase that we're also accustomed to where you question, do I capitalize that? Did I spell that correctly? Is this accurate punctuation? Is my syntax even making any sense? Let all that go. Focus on just transcribing whatever thoughts come to your head straight onto the paper. And as much as you can, ignore that inner editor that's telling you to slow down and to think about it. Just let it happen. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is a 10-minute exercise. And what I'd like you to do, this doesn't have to take 10 minutes. We'll kind of see how it goes. We've got a small group here, so I'll keep a pulse on what you guys are working on. But I'd like you to take 10 minutes and think about these questions and respond to them. I'd like you to list some instances when you as a student were asked to produce ungraded writing. So writing where you were not expected to turn it in and be evaluated on it. If you can think about some times when that was asked of you when you were in a student's shoes, a student's capacity. I wonder if these experiences were helpful to you as a learner. So focusing on that learning goal. And if they were, how were they useful? How were they helpful? And then finally, kind of at this point, without having gone through any of my spiel here, what's your general opinion about assigning ungraded writing in your own classrooms, and why? So just riff off of these for about 10 minutes, see what you get. Again, if everybody runs out of steam, we'll stop earlier. So a couple of things I want you to notice about how this writing exercise was set up was that I tried to give very specific directions with specific questions that are getting at the sorts of materials that I'm hoping students will engage. And I participated as well. And that's really important in getting students to feel comfortable and feel like they're not on display and that you're not somehow separate from them, like you've already figured all this out and you don't have to think about these things anymore. One of the uses of this ungraded writing is recognizing writing as a facilitation of thinking. And we all can continue to facilitate our thinking. It doesn't matter what level we're at. So those are just a few things that for you to notice in the way that I conducted that. And most of these suggestions that I'm giving you, I should explain this, came from either the chapter here, my own research in the Education Leadership Department and in my own just general interest in composition scholarship, as well as my teaching. This is my 4th semester teaching Writing 101. Before that, I taught Writing 080 at Gallatin College, and before that, I taught many years ago CLS. So I've used low stakes writing in a variety of different classrooms. They've all been very humanities based, I will admit, and writing heavy classrooms. But these suggestions that I'm giving you are coming from those different sources, the things that I've read in my own experiences. All right, so to begin with this, we should come to a definition of terms, because terminology gets sticky. Educators, when we think about writing and its function in the classroom, we're almost always thinking about what we call high-stakes writing, or what education scholars would call high-stakes writing. And high-stakes writing is intended to create a product that we can evaluate and put a grade on. And this is really, I mean, we often do this to see if students understand concepts, if they have mastery of a subject matter. We use it in essay tests, we use it in papers, we use it in even short answer tests. All of those would be high stakes writing. And students are very accustomed to expect high stakes writing, and we're really comfortable with high stakes writing. And I am not here to diminish the value of high stakes writing. I think it has a place in every class, and it has a place in my class. Instead, I'm here to advocate for low stakes writing, which I think is less well recognized. So, but what do I mean by that? Low stakes writing is not judged on content. Low stakes writing involves creating texts or having students create texts, if we're trying to facilitate low stakes writing, that are meant to engage concepts and topics without having to worry about judgment or evaluation. So these are kind of the basic term definitions that we need to get down, that there's this binary between high stakes and low stakes writing, and that they each have functions, but they're very different. And it's really this conceptual shift that I want to get to. And by conceptual shift, I'm talking about the goal of low stakes writing. And this is a quote out of the McKeechee text. The goal here is not so much to produce excellent pieces of writing as to increase how much students think about, understand, and learn what we are teaching. You could describe the goal this way. You can throw away the low stakes writing itself yet keep the neural changes it produced, the new insights and understandings. So the conceptual shift that I'm talking about is, instead of focusing on the product as valuable, that the product of the writing, this is in high stakes writing, is the only thing of value. It's the process of creating the writing that has value in itself. And the argument here is that that value is increasing how much students think about, understand, and learn what we're teaching, which is ultimately our goal. So again, how is this a tool for us to use in facilitating that kind of meaningful learning? There are a few things, there are a few specific benefits that I want to go over that I think low stakes writing offers to the instructor in any discipline. Low stakes writing actively involves students in the subject matter. And what I mean by that, the primary term there is active as opposed to passive. So many of our tools for helping students construct a knowledge base are passive. Lectures and readings. And those are our primary ways of getting information out there. And it's really easy for students to engage that in a passive manner. And they're really good at it. Students have been so well trained to sit there and absorb the things that they're supposed to absorb and to then restate them in the way and the place that they're supposed to restate them. And I would argue, and a lot of education scholars would argue, that that doesn't represent meaningful learning. And so we need to find some ways to get students more active in their understanding of the material, in their engagement with the material. Low stakes writing provides an opportunity to do that. Because if students have to write something down, they have to engage it. They have to be active. They can't just sit there and let it wash over them. And they can't just, write down an outline off of the board from the lecture notes or off of the slides. They have to construct something. Low stakes writing also encourages students to put ideas into their own language. And this has a number of values, but primarily it encourages a much deeper understanding of the material as well. If students are able to, many students are able to restate what they read or what they heard in a lecture without actually understanding what that means. If they're forced to put it into their own language, they're forced to, if it makes any sense, they understand it, at least at a basic level. It improves comfort with written expression, and that's one of the primary goals of the university, especially if you're in the English department, but it's true across the board. If you look at the mission goals and the vision statement that is being put out right now, getting students to write well or to express themselves in a verbal format is important. This is the way that we communicate as professionals and as scholars. We have to write things down. This is practice. Low stakes writing is practice. You're not going to be judged on it. This isn't the game. This is where you have to go out and practice these things. It's just putting words on paper and learning to progress or to translate what's in your head into a written space. This can help, low stakes writing can help instructors get an honest or accurate assessment of student understanding. What I mean by that, I'll give you a specific example by what I mean with that. A lot of people have heard of the minute paper. That's kind of been popular in the last 20 years. It's an example of low stakes writing. One thing that we can do as instructors, there's kind of that question like, okay, I constructed this lecture or I put together this reading list and then I threw it out there and I hope they got it. You can create either what's called a minute paper, which is really usually more like a 5-minute paper. So for example, at the end of a lecture, you can ask students to take 2 minutes or 3 minutes, it won't take much of your time, and write down what are the most important points that they got out of that lecture and perhaps how they connected to the work that you did in the previous unit. And ask students not to put their names on those and turn them into you. You then have a specific artifact that lets you know what students were getting out of your lecture as opposed to just trying to guess what they took away from it. You can read this and it's right there in front of you. And I would also argue this is going to take a little bit of your time, but as opposed to other assessment methods that we can use in the classroom, this takes very little of your time. And that's one of the other things that's great about low stakes writing. Because you don't have to grade it, it doesn't take a ton of your time. It has great benefit with minimal impact on our already very busy schedules. So I think that writing assignments, high stakes writing assignments, take a ton of time because you have to evaluate them. That's not the case with low stakes writing. It's good practice if you can respond to some of this. It's always good to give students responses if you have the time to do so. But if you don't, just having them write it down and you reading it provides benefit. Low stakes writing can particularly help students in math and sciences understand the process of problem solving through narrative. The problem with writing in general, and I think particularly low stakes writing in the university, is that it gets pigeonholed. Oh, you only do that in English, or you only do that in humanities classes, maybe in your history department, but otherwise it doesn't fit. Well, I'd like to argue that it does, because once you get to graduate school, you know that if you don't publish, you're not going to get anywhere anyway. So you probably have to be able to write, and you should probably practice it. I'm going to bring up a specific example shortly, but one of the ways that in terms of like an actual example of what I mean, having students in a problem-solving situation, which is generally what you've got in hard sciences and math, having them create a narrative of what they're doing and the choices that they're making while they're working on a problem gives them all kinds of opportunities for learning. And it promotes the sort of metacognition, the thinking about the thinking that we want them doing. We want them to self-regulate their own thinking. We want them to be aware of what they're doing when they engage in a question, when they're sitting down to work. Well, if you ask them to write down, okay, so I started with this problem and I didn't know what to do with this variable, so I switched these here, and they go through that whole process and they write it out. They then have evidence of what they did. They can compare that with other scholars or other students or with their instructors to see where they did things that worked and where they didn't. And that, again, it has multiple benefits. One, it can help them understand the material better. Two, it gets them thinking about what they're doing and working on that meta level, which is one of the goals that we have. And finally, it can help to keep students on task with regular integrated assignments. What I mean by that is what I use low stakes writing for in my class. So for example, a lot of the low stakes writing that I ask my students to do in Writing 101, I call it thought pieces. This is very different from your papers, which are going to be graded. This is your space to think. And I've learned from experience that if you ask students to read material and then just expect that they have, that doesn't always work out. So if you encourage them or require them to produce something, some thinking that you're not even going to grade, but they have to have thought about it and answered a question about it, if nothing else, it gets more of them to actually do the reading, in my experience. When they have to come in with some kind of like, oh yeah, I thought about it. I'm not saying that they read all of it, but they read more of it, and they read it more thoughtfully. This is not a magic bullet to get students to read more, but it helps. All right, so some specific examples. These are the sorts of questions that you would want to use to prompt students for a low-stakes writing assignment. So from a writing class, this is one of the ones that I took this straight out of my own class. After reading rhetorical situations and their constituents and everyday rhetoric, explain how understanding rhetorical situations is useful to you as a student and a member of society. Well, to give you some background information on this, rhetorical situations and their constituents is a peer-reviewed, very dense, relatively unpleasant article to read. Really interesting, very high-level thinking. Everyday rhetoric is dealing with the same analysis of, okay, what happens in a rhetorical situation, what are the parts, how do we talk about it, how do we understand it, but it's written in layman's terms, targeted at an undergraduate level audience. And so they've already read, in this situation, they've read both of these, and I'm asking them to explain how this connects to their lives. Two of their identities are as students and as members of the society. Okay, well, how does this connect to what you do? Make those connections between your life and your thinking and the things that you just had to read. So this is from a biology class here on campus that utilizes low-stakes writing. Are contemporary populations of humans evolving? Explain how you know. Well, this requires them to not just understand the material that they've been presented in lectures in their books, but to apply it. They have to apply what they understand about evolution and particularly natural selection to humans, which everybody's interested in humans. It's like when we get our students to write about themselves, they get really excited. And then this is from a physics class, also here on campus. While you're answering your homework question, please write out exactly what you're thinking. Be as specific as possible, including the questions you ask yourself and the places where you get confused or stuck. And this is relating to that example that I talked about in the last slide. So this is an example of, and trying to ignore the bullet points on this side, I couldn't get them to go away, I'm sorry. This is an example of, I took this from one of the students' thought pieces responding to that question. And I like this example for a number of reasons. I'll read it to you and then we'll talk about it. So these are, again, this is all the student's words. This is straight out of his thought piece. Rhetorical situations. Words organized in a manner to describe an idea. What's this idea? Aristotle and Plato's thoughts on human interaction and what that looks like in a transcribed and communicated standard? Is it deeper than we even realize now? Well, of course it is. Rhetorical situations is an attempt to place an understanding of something that is so broad as to connect everything into categories. How can we ever do such an idea justice? Well, we can't, but by attempting to do such a thing, we attempt to bring everyone together in understanding and ultimately raise the possibilities we have. However, to be successful, we must not forget, and everyone must understand, we are attempting to connect dots that quite literally endless. Now, I didn't put this up there because it's a stellar piece of writing. I actually don't know what he's talking about. I have no idea. I mean, I have a vague understanding of where he's going, but that's not the point. This doesn't represent really successful writing as a final product. But what I think it does represent is the student really struggling. I mean, you can almost hear like these ideas just pouring out of him and picking up speed. And it's obvious that he's making personal connections to this material. And so I don't really care if I understand it. That's not for me to judge. That's not the reason I have him constructing this. The point is, he's engaged, and he's thinking about it, and he's making connections to his own life. Whether or not I can follow, doesn't matter, because it's a different frame of writing. And this next slide, don't worry, you can't read this because it's tiny, but basically what this is the physics problem written out in narration. And yeah, I should say, I know nothing about physics. Other than the very basics of like the theoretical physics I took over 10 years ago, or not theoretical, but basic physics rather. But I can understand what's going on in this. So I'm just going to read the very beginning of this so you can see how this comes together. Okay. When I confront this problem, I understand what the question asks, but I don't immediately know how to get there. What would it look like mathematically for Steve Iger to get to the other side? Obviously, he needs to be able to reach 18 meters across in the time that it takes him to fall 12 meters. Time is the connection between vertical and horizontal motion. So maybe I could solve the vertical equations first to figure out how long it takes Steve to fall 12 meters, then use that time in the horizontal equations to see what horizontal distance he travels. If I get an answer that is less than 18 meters, I'll be able to say he didn't make it. Or I could find the time it takes Steve to travel 18 meters across, then use that time to find how far down he travels in the same period. If it's more than 12 meters, I'll be able to say he didn't make it. So you can see this particular example, in full disclosure, this is the instructor's model. And the instructor models this for the students before she asks them to do it. But you can see that problem solving no longer here is something that you just either know or you don't, and that it's just applying the right things in the right places. You have to think your way through it. And this allows students to recognize, oh, wait a minute, it's okay that I get confused when I first start dealing with this. And I can work my way through that process, and I can write out that narrative so I can understand what I'm doing and where I'm successful or less successful. So this would be an example. In a place where we don't often see low-stakes writing, physics class, that's how it can be useful. Okay, so hopefully, maybe, I've got a few of you to recognize that there might be value in utilizing low-stakes writing, or you can at least see what my argument is for it. With that in mind, since we all do teach, what do we do to create effective exercises? Well, I can't tell you what sorts of questions specifically you want to ask because you have to ascertain your own learning goals in your classrooms. But I can give you some specific ideas about how to engage this with your students that will make it more effective. The primary most important thing, and I think this is true in all of our teaching, but particularly in this, is to really let students know what you're trying to do, what they're supposed to be doing and getting out of this, and give them as much transparent information as possible. So by specifically articulating the goals of low-stakes writing in terms of working to understand the material, say over and over again, this is about your understanding. We're doing this so that you can augment your understanding. It's the whole purpose of all of this. It's not so you can produce, a brilliant paper right now. So you can get a stronger understanding of the material we're working on. As an instructor, you should also emphasize the differences between low and high stakes writing. Students are really accustomed to high stakes writing. They're comfortable with that. They know how it works. So when they see a writing assignment, they're going to fall into those patterns. Your job is to short circuit that and get them to think in different terms and recognize that this is a totally different function that they're trying to perform with this document by creating this text. You got to say that over and over again. You got to explain, this is high stakes writing, this is low stakes writing. This is this kind of assignment, this is that kind of assignment. You don't have to use those terms, but they have to understand that there's a difference there. I find it repeatedly helpful to repeatedly state that the writing itself will not be graded on content. And you can't just say this once. You got to say it like 80 times because students are so accustomed to being graded on their content when they write something. So this has to be like hammered home. If grades are given, the grades should be based on participation intent, not the quality of writing. So for example, with the thought pieces I was telling you about in my class, either you do it or you don't. Either you get credit or you don't get credit, but you don't get partial credit depending on how good your ideas were or how good the piece of writing was. If you do want to grade it on that scale. So it takes away that pressure to produce and instead just says, okay, well, I thought about it and I transcribed some thoughts. Great, you get credit. And then finally, I find it helpful to overtly state and encourage students not to focus on the rules of composition or struggle to get the wording exactly right or hit that punctuation just like I did when we started our first writing assignment. Something to get them out of that mode. Talk about the fact that we're all accustomed to having that internal editor. I mean, this is something that you get if you take writing classes, they talk about the internal editor. It doesn't get talked about elsewhere. But it's a process we all can recognize. We all know that thought as you're trying to move from brain to paper and you're like, oh wait, no, that's not right. Oh, I don't think this is, and you can shut that down and just kind of let things happen. It takes some practice, but we can get there. And you need to tell students that that's the goal that they're working toward. If they don't know what the goal is, they're never going to get there. Okay, so that's kind of my basic overview of low stakes writing, and now I'm going to move into specifics about this other kind of esoteric article. But I want to open up a space for questions or clarification. Yeah, please.
It's more like a comment that I read a thing about when you're trying to write something, it goes totally with what you're saying, is to write by hand instead of starting with the computer.
Mm-hmm.
Because your computer automatically kicks in that polished, finished look, right? And I thought about so many of our college students now have been writing through their computer for a long time, unlike myself. Somebody else wrote it on a computer for me. But, so that's a huge thing for them. They're used to seeing that little red squiggly line the minute they put in the wrong word, the wrong verb.
Yeah.
So how much of this, I'm assuming they do in class with handwriting rather than bring it in the next day? Or have you played with if they do it on a computer, what it's like? Or
I have a little bit.
About that?
I have a little bit, and there's been some research on this, though none of it's been conclusive at all. It's interesting because for me personally, I can type so much faster than I can write that I've trained myself to kind of realize the different frames that I'm working in. So I can accomplish the low stakes task on a keyboard very well. But for students or for anybody, for writers who are having trouble with that, forcing that change in writing venue can absolutely be helpful. And I've definitely asked students to do that in the past when they were having trouble with it. Yeah. And said, okay, well try just writing it down on a piece of paper. I know that seems archaic, but you know, see what happens.
One of the low stakes writing assignments is write how you would go about getting yourself into that frame set to write low stakes. You know, like an iPad is easy to do low stakes because it's always thrown into a bunch of capitals, you know, and stuff. So you get used to, if I put it on this, I'm going to clean it up later. So it's almost like just sketch it out by hand. Or color their paper. You know, their paper that red and blue, and that, you know, on the computer.
Right.
Change the color so you know, oh, nobody's looking at this but me. But that could be actually an assignment of what are you going to do so you know when your editor kicks in and when your editor doesn't need to come in the door.
That's really interesting. I like that idea of getting them narrate that process. But you know the one thing I did do one time that worked out, and I did this last semester, I don't know why I didn't do this semester, I forgot until right now. I had them do one of their first low stakes writing assignments in text speak.
Nice.
And, I mean, it's with students who are so accustomed to like any kind of you know, informal communication, writing communication being done that way, it can trigger exactly what you're thinking about. And yeah.
I want to follow up with her question. Do you ever do this, like, as an at-home assignment and they bring it in, or is it always?
Primarily, my thought pieces are at-home assignments because I'm asking them to engage the reading assignment. But we do low-stakes writing in class as well. So I use it in both venues. Most of the assignments in my class are low-stakes writing that, you know, either you do it or you don't, and it's really just getting them to say, okay, here's what we've read, you know, either answer this question or connect it to this other reading or to the lecture or something like that. But oftentimes I'll have them do something like that for their homework, and then they'll come in and we'll start off the class with a slightly different question, and the other thing that can help is you can really move into discussions because they've already thought about that. And if you want to have a discussion-based classroom, this can give them something to look at. They thought about it, they wrote about it, and now they can articulate that. I don't know if that answered your question, Cheryl.
I thought it's something similar.
And that can, I think brainstorming is an example of low stakes writing. I think that's one way that happened. I think that fits. And for students who like to kind of create visual connections between ideas that way, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I have students who aren't comfortable expressing themselves kind of in that linear narrative prose form. That's fine. If you want to give me a list of kind of disentangled bullet points, I'm not going to complain about that as long as you're engaging that material. So I think that it is, the brainstorming fits into this category, but I think it encompasses more than that. Yeah?
So I do something like this in review sections, in this section. And I've run into the problem frequently that students haven't read whatever they're supposed to have read, and it's something like, I didn't read this, but here's what I think the answer might be.
Oh.
And I'm having a hard time because it's intended to give students credit for thinking. So how do you suggest, if you have any suggestions for assigning credit for something like that? And I feel like I really have a hard time giving somebody points for saying, I didn't read this, but, you know, if I were making up an answer.
Yeah, I don't give credit for that, to be honest with you. What I say is, I say, you know, the option is either you did this or you didn't. Part of doing this is doing the reading. So you can't, and I've absolutely called students out when I had one student this semester who, I can't remember exactly what we were working on, but the title of the text assumed one thing. Oh, I remember, it was the text was called Rewriting. But this author's definition of rewriting had to do with rewriting someone else's text in your own words as you're trying to understand it. And this student gave me a whole page and a half about how important it was to revise your drafts. And so I was able to come back to that student and say, you didn't even try. You didn't even look at this. Like, I know you didn't read this. So, and in that case, I said, I'll give you another shot at this. You can, if you get it into me by the end of the day, I'll give you credit for it. But that did a couple things for me. One, it allowed that student to recognize what my expectations in the class were and that he couldn't skate by. And that I was going to figure it out if he tried to. I love that. Like, oh, they won't notice that what I wrote had nothing to do with the material. Of course I'm going to notice. So that's, I mean, that would be what I would do, Sarah. I would let them know, like, if you haven't, part of doing this assignment is doing the reading. If you don't do the reading, you don't get credit. It sucks because then you have to be the bad guy, but I know. I don't either, but I haven't figured out a way around it. Marie?
I've used it a little bit in my class. I started out with a minute paper, and then I said, you have 5 minutes, and then I this last one was a 10-minute paper, they want a half hour done.
Oh, wow.
So you have to like, I mean, if you really want them to just do this real short exercise, low stakes, you really have, like, all those things that you said you have to tell them, you really have to emphasize. Because otherwise they think, oh, I'm going to show how much I know. It's like, I don't really want to know everything you know. I just want you to write it down and get it over with, you know. So, yeah, this is really timely for me because this is one of the things I do. And one of the reasons I use it is to make sure that they were there for participation. Again, if they haven't read it, some of them can BS pretty good, you know. And actually, some of them have some pretty stellar ideas just doing that. So that, yeah, maybe that's okay, you know. But
And I think that you make that's exactly what will happen if they don't understand what the function is, and if students aren't getting there, they'll think, oh my goodness, I have to do this just like I would, you know, they'll treat it like it's an essay test, and that undermines the whole purpose of what you're trying to get at.
yeah, exactly. So I'm going back to the mini paper. There's no more 5 minutes. It's going to be a minute. They're going to take 5 minutes.
It's like an egg timer.
Yeah, really. A little timer.
And you're done.
So my question is, do you ever run into students who A, think it's busy work, or B, just can't think of it in the low stakes framework? And how do you address, especially the busy work thing, how do you show them that it's relevant to whatever you're doing, that you're scaffolding it in somehow to make it worth their real thought?
And I think that the point you bring up is a really important one, because students who are so expectant of that, I do high-level work and you heap praise upon me and then I get my A dynamic, are gonna think that this really is busy work. Like, this doesn't contribute to me looking more awesome, so I don't see why I would do this. And isn't it generally with the more type A students?
So true.
Yeah. So with those students, I think it.
Find on my own without paper. Kind of like that.
Very much like that, yeah. And you're wasting my time. You're having me do things that I'm not going to get a grade on.
Right.
That's a waste of time. I think it has to do with the way that you frame the assignment and talking about the goals for this and recognizing, okay, you're not going to get out of this class with the grade that you want simply by being able to memorize the material. So you better find ways to augment your thinking. And we do have these high stakes writings where I expect a lot from you. I'm going to expect a lot, not just in terms of your construction, but your thinking better be so well put together that it floors me. Otherwise, you won't get your A. So you should probably use this as an opportunity to refine that thinking. And that's the approach that I've taken with students in the past.
Truly a missile. Gotcha.
Well, and by painting it as this has value for you,
Yeah.
even if you don't want to recognize it, because it has to be an intrinsically motivated activity.
Give it a chance.
Yeah, exactly. If this doesn't help you construct, you know, a deeper level of understanding for your paper, then we can talk. Then you can come to me and we can work our way through it, because that means that we're not communicating the right way. But I think it will. So if you engage in this, you know, for the first unit or whatever, and if you're still having problems, let's talk about it again. Does that help? Any other basic questions on on my basic explanation of low stakes writing? All right. Now we're gonna get a little, I don't want to say weird, but we're gonna engage a composition scholarship text and kind of walk through some of the ideas. And the text is The Shifting Relationships Between Speech and Writing by Peter Elbow. And so my intention for doing this is, this hits on a lot of this. He doesn't use any of the terms low stakes writing in this article, but it has very similar ideas and applications in the low stakes writing world, I guess. So my hope is that we'll go through this. I'll give you some of basic explanations of some of his ideas, and then we're gonna have another writing exercise at the end where my expectation is gonna be that you'll apply some of these ideas from Elbow to some of the ways that you might use low stakes writing. This article is extremely long. as you'll tell really quickly how verbose this guy is. And so I've only taken small bits and pieces of one idea that he presents. If you find it interesting, I do suggest reading it. I think it's a really fun article. Well, maybe fun's the wrong word. Engaging article to read, and the ideas in there are useful. But I'm just barely scratching at the surface. He gets really weird. So okay, Elbow claims that speech is inherently more indelible, more permanent than writing because it's a more vivid medium. And this is a weird claim because we're used to thinking of it as the inverse. We usually think of speech as what we can toss away because you speak it and then it's gone and it doesn't come back to haunt you. Whereas writing, you're putting it in ink. It is there and you're going to be judged by it and it's going to follow you, especially if it gets on the internet. It may never go away. So we think of writing as the permanent, the severe communicative act. What Elbow wants us to at least play with is, what about switching that around? His central claim here is that it's actually speech that we can't hide or get rid of. And if any of you have families with long memories or friends, you know what I'm talking about. You know, I still get a hard time for things I said in like 1992. So he's suggesting that we can conceptualize of writing and speech differently. His claim, or his call to arms here almost, is that we need a mode of discourse that really is ephemeral, that's temporary. We need the luxury of being able to utter everything on our minds and not have anyone hear it until after we decide what we really mean or how we want to say it. This is one of his central claims, that we need this. We need to figure this out because this is what we need. We need this space. My sort of immediate question is, okay, why do we need this? If you're gonna state it in that kind of language that we need this, you gotta convince me. I've come to notice the enormous cognitive and linguistic leverage that comes from learning to avoid the mentality dominated by the indelibility of writing and learning instead to exploit the ephemeral or underside of writing. What's important here, I think, is this idea of cognitive and linguistic leverage. Levers that we can use to push cognitive and linguistic change in our students. And that's what we really want. We want to evoke cognitive change. And one of the ways of doing that is in a linguistic format. That's kind of the primary way. That's how we test. That's how we communicate. So he's saying we need a tool there in order to make this happen. And we need to move away from this mentality of indelibility as writing, and that is going to be our tool. And if we can exploit this underside, that will give us this leverage. And again, I might be a little skeptical. My thought is, can't we achieve this leverage of ephemerality by sitting and thinking? I mean, that's sort of the basic element of ephemeral constructions. You sit and you think about it. That can't come back to judge you because no one got it. So why do we need this other thing? What's wrong with just contemplation and then write it out or then speak it? What do you got? Murray would claim that writing in this mode, and by this mode he means that underside, that ephemeral mode, can produce an immersion in discourse, and those are his emphasized words, can produce an immersion in discourse itself that doesn't occur when we sit and think. An immersion in language that can entice us into ideas and perceptions that we could not get by planning. So his claim here is that, no, you can't get there by sitting and thinking. That's not actually true. That sitting and thinking is not sufficient. Okay, I get that he's claiming that it's not sufficient, but my question then becomes, well, how is this better? How is this ephemeral writing better than contemplation? You say it is. How? Writing is a way to get what is inside one's head outside on paper, so there's room for more. Writing provides us with two organisms for thinking instead of just one. The thoughts can go back and forth, richen, and grow. We think of writing as deriving meaning from the mind that produces it, but when all goes well, the mind derives meaning from the text it produces. All right, I kind of like this idea of two brains. Two brains sounds useful. I wish I had them. And supposedly your claim here is that I can get two brains by utilizing this ephemeral writing. However, this whole thing of like recursive writing is deriving meaning, but then mind deriving meaning from it's a little esoteric. It sounds good, but what does that look like? I mean, what do we do? What do we do with this in a more practical sense? So, I don't know if this is any less esoteric, but thus the potentiality in writing that I want to highlight here does not just involve generative techniques for getting first drafts written quicker, because that actually won't happen. And that's usually the way we think of teaching writing techniques. How can we make this faster and easier? But rather a genuine change in mentality or consciousness. Cultivation of writing as ephemeral fosters the use of discourse and writing in particular, not so much to express what we think, but rather to develop and transform it. And that last part is the important part. That it's not so much about expressing what we think, but developing and transforming it. And my hope is that all of you have had this experience in your own writing process, where you sit down and you're not exactly sure what's gonna happen, but you start writing, and just by interacting with that page, your own thinking achieves a level that you hadn't gotten to before. And Murray basically just does a critical analysis of that experience and then asks us to look differently at the way we approach writing and speech. And that's, again, he goes on and on with all kinds of different offshoots of this, but that's sort of his overarching message here, is that if we can sit down and kind of just write some ideas out, and then we can read them back to ourselves and see what sticks, and then continue, we can have an interaction with ourselves and with our own thinking that will allow that thinking to richen and to grow and to develop. That's all we're going to get out of Elbow here. So the big question then becomes, what does this mean for us as educators? It's an interesting article, but okay, so what? What does it mean to us if we're trying to find usages for low stakes writing? Obviously there's some connections there, but that wasn't an article about low stakes writing. So I'm not gonna answer this particular question, but I'm gonna ask you to do so. And what I'd like us to do, this is pretty much, we've come to the end, but what I'd like for you to do is to get into groups of 2 or 3 and to discuss these questions before you answer them. And then to write out your answers. Again, we'll take 10 or 15 minutes for this, however long it takes. And afterwards, we can do another kind of final question and answer session and address any concerns or issues that you might have. But I'd like you to do this first. So how might Elbow's ideas connect to the broad concepts about the value and implementation of low stakes writing? And then I want you to think about this in terms of your own classrooms. Can you think of some specific applications for low stakes writing you might employ in your field to achieve specific thinking and learning goals for undergraduate students? And those thinking and learning goals, those are individual. Those depend on what you're teaching and where. So be aware that we have thinking and learning goals for our students. Think about those first before you think about the application question. All right. So I'm kind of thinking that we've made our way through this exercise. I really appreciate everything you guys have sat through and your willingness to engage this. As an example of low stakes writing, I asked you to complete these tasks, these exercises. And I'm hoping, you don't have to, but I'm hoping you'll allow me to collect them without your names on them. The reason being, I'm curious to see what you got out of this and how, I'm curious to use this to evaluate myself and my own teaching practice. And again, you don't have to, if you really want to hold on to those notes, it's fine. But
Just give you a little note that said, you done good.
Sweet. But my idea here is to be able to see, okay, what did people get out of this? Where are they applying it? How are they applying it? And that'll allow me to kind of analyze what you're getting from as opposed to what I'm hoping you get. So this is kind of a circular presentation. It is actually doing what it's talking about doing at the same time. I have a tendency to do that. So anyway, thank you very much. Do you have any other questions? Anything else that, as a large group, that I can cover?
I've got one. I was having a real fun time, but a hard time connecting his idea of if speech is indelible, is he saying, although you say he's not using low stakes writing words, but is he talking about drafting something or laying your ideas down in words, and then by looking at those words, you have kind of a relationship that you're transforming those words maybe into new ideas or deeper ideas. So the speech thing was just something cool you kind of threw up there, but was it supposed to make us think that even saying it out loud would not make that process happen, that it was really the process of writing? Or
That is his claim, absolutely. Okay. And that you then have an artifact that you can read back to yourself.
Yeah.
And the type of writing that he's talking about is not writing that's intended to communicate. It's writing that's intended to develop thinking. So you're sitting down at the page with the intention of developing thought, not sitting down at the page with the intention of producing something that you're going to give to someone else.
Yeah, that's a great distinction. So does he, or have you gone deeper into it? Well, I don't know if it's deeper, but have you thought about different learning styles, and that some learning styles would not see this as busy work, some would, and how, you know, the connection between how they would use different parts of their brain, anyway, any of that stuff?
Well, Elbow was not thinking along the lines of learning styles, not that research wasn't starting to get done, but this article was published in '87. So that was pretty new at that point. I honestly haven't thought about it in relation to learning styles. That doesn't mean that it doesn't fit there. There's certainly some things to think about. And, you know, I think that for particular people who are comfortable with ways of articulation, like global thinkers, for example, would be particularly comfortable with this. But I think that regardless of learning style, I would say that going through this action and doing something that may not be particularly comfortable still has value.
Oh, but you could do a whole, if someone hasn't already done it, I mean, you could do a whole master's or PhD just on this one topic and how it fits different learning styles and what it gives
Absolutely.
back. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
And what Elbow doesn't do, it's a very meditative, interesting piece of writing. He doesn't have any specific, he doesn't go out and test this theory and come back with any hard results. That's not Elbow's style. I would love to see someone do that with this. My thesis is written at this point, so I won't be doing it. But I think that would be a really interesting exercise and research question.
So have you seen any differences, like in the students' responses, if it's an at-home assignment versus an in-class assignment?
Yes. It's much harder for them to think about an at-home assignment as low stakes.
So that's what I was thinking.
Because it's homework. Yeah. And it takes lots of time and repetition to move through that, in my experience. Whereas if you're having them, okay, just right off the cuff, kind of like what we're doing here, it's much easier to change that expectation.
So do you find one more valuable than the other in your teaching?
I don't, but I use them for different purposes. I generally use the in-class low-stakes writing as sort of a precursor to a discussion.
Okay.
That's not to say that's the only way to use it. That's just how I'm most comfortable with it. I'd like to find other ways of utilizing it in class.
What are your goals for the at-home assignments?
For the at-home assignments, I'm really trying to get them to practice the level of thinking and connection that they're then going to have to practice it in a safe space that they're going to have to do on their higher stakes writing assignments. And, you know, to get them actively engaging with the material that I'm asking them to read, as opposed to running their eyes along the lines, if at all. I mean, that's if they realize they've got to have something, I notice a huge difference. The students who aren't going to do the writing no matter what still aren't going to do the writing no matter what, but they're not going to turn in any of that writing. Right. And so by midterm I can say, you're not going to pass. And that's helpful because those students wouldn't be able to complete the high stakes writing assignments at the level that they needed to, but they're not going to get to the end of the semester and be like, wait, what do you mean I didn't pass? Well, I know you haven't done any of the work. I know you haven't read any of this stuff because I've gotten all your writing. So before we get there, maybe you should drop. And I mean, that's a different conversation, but I'm very open about that with my students. Like, you're not gonna be able to pass here, so let's talk about other options.
I may have missed it because I came in late. Have you or others assessed the effectiveness of low stakes writing in any way?
So that's, I think, where this article falls short. There is no assessment of this. It's really pontification as opposed to assessment. I haven't, but that research does exist, and I'm struggling to come up with who was that wrote that. I can't remember who it was.
I can't remember either.
So I apologize, Dr. Fox, but I can get you that article. I've got it in my desk.
But is it in terms of an assessment of their writing skills, or is it more based on greater understanding of whatever it is they're studying, or?
It's understanding assessment. It's cognitive assessment, not writing skills assessment. I haven't seen any studies about assessing writing skills in correlation to low stakes writing exercises. I've not seen that. Yeah. Well, a primary reason for that is because in composition studies, the focusing on writing skills is taboo at this point and has been for about the last 25 years. So if you're focused on writing skills, you're missing the boat in most people's opinions. Yeah, you probably won't get published.
This is very confusing to us. Why? Is that just a trend in the field?
Man, that's a long answer.
Miles.
Oh, so I'm going to try and shorten this as much as I can. The short answer to that is we're doing our students a disservice if all we do is conceptualize for them that writing is just conforming to the right structures, and not recognizing that to learn to write you actually have to learn to convert interesting thoughts and the attempt to communicate. So just because you use appropriate grammar and syntax and punctuation and construction doesn't mean that you're being successful in your writing. It is, however, very easy to test students on what they call the phenomenology of error. And that was the way that writing was taught for a very long time, but that is limiting because it's not providing students with an actual understanding of what writing should hope to be.
And that they don't succeed in those tests very well because the way to train for those tests is through rote drills, and those have nothing to do with the actual writing they have to do in college. So it doesn't actually help them, is what the argument is.
It's hard to memorize something if you don't see any functional structure or usage for it.